Lovely to have your company. It's been a busy week at the COVID inquiry with Professor Chris Whitty, Sir Patrick Vallance and Jonathan Van Tam giving evidence.
Let's take a look.
I was very aware that we essentially had two different things we were trying to balance. The risk of going too early, in which case you get all the damages from this with actually fairly minimal impact on the epidemic, and the risk of going too late, in which case you get all the problems of the pandemic running away. Now, as we will, I'm sure, come on to, my view is, with the benefit of hindsight, we went a bit too late on the first wave.
Well, we didn't see it before it was announced, and I think others in the Cabinet Office have also said they didn't see it before it was formulated as a policy, so we weren't involved in the run-up to it. So I think it would have been very obvious to anyone that this was likely to cause inevitably would cause an increase in transmission risk, and I think that would have been known by ministers. Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte, and that he did struggle with some of the concepts, and we did need to repeat them often.
Where I think, it finally got to me was the fact that I might have expected that if a crisis happened, this was, my responsibility to bear that kind of workload. I did not expect my family to be threatened with having their throats cut. I did not expect the police to have to say, will you move out in the middle of the night, in the middle of the evening, will you move out for a few days while we look at this and potentially make some arrests.
Jonathan Van Tam there, tough. I'm sorry, if you're in public life and you're making decisions which are affecting people's lives and people's families and their livelihoods and the mental health of their teenagers, you are going to get some flack. Well, I'm sorry, and it's not relevant to the COVID inquiry.
Bev, I don't think we can be seen to, consider it acceptable that he's had death threats, his family have been threatened. The bottom line is that that's how it is for public figures these days. I think it's a really bad thing. My heart goes out to him and his family, but my heart doesn't go out to these revisionist scientists who are trying to gaslight all of us by suggesting that lockdowns were highly effective, that they saved lives. Look at us. We've got a destroyed economy. We've got a divided society, a generation of damaged kids. Nothing to show for it. I'm afraid there are other places. In America, Florida unlocked a year and a half before California. Comparable death rate from COVID. What bothers me about this inquiry is that I think it was the biggest Horlicks in history. I think they made a complete mess up of the whole thing. And yet this inquiry is there just to cover backsides and suggest that there's nothing to see here, we did all the right things.
Be still my beating heart, Mark Dolan. Because, of course, the thing is, what we need to understand is motivation behind these decisions. And it seems to be predicated on the idea that lockdowns are a good idea, and lockdowns, you better get used to it because we're going to have them in the future. The government says stay at home, you're going to be expected to. It's not even questioning the cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns, and all of the conclusions on each of these interview sessions seem to lead to, why didn't you lock down harder, earlier, sooner? Not whether you should have locked down at all. And motivation, I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah. Motivation. Well, you have to wonder, don't you? I mean, the issue you've got is you've got a generation of politicians and scientists who are marking their own homework.
Yeah.
Where are the likes of Carl Hennigan, who called out the irregularities, the madness of these policies during the pandemic? Well, of course, he was demonised and cancelled like so many.
Yeah, and he actually gave evidence to the COVID inquiry and was treated with a completely different tone of interviewing than everybody else. Jonathan Van Tam yesterday, setting out his credentials, didn't say that he works for Moderna. Why is that not relevant? That's very relevant. Olivia Utley is our political correspondent at Westminster. She's going to give us the latest on the inquiry, perhaps with a little less emotion. Olivia, what's going on at the inquiry today?
Well, it's been a very difficult week, as you mentioned there, for Rishi Sunak in particular, actually. There's been a lot of criticism of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Patrick Vallance called it the Eat Out to Help Out the Virus scheme. All three scientists, Chris Whitty, Jonathan Van Tam and Patrick Vallance, all said that they weren't consulted. Now, of course, ministers argue that the reason that scientists are there is to advise them, and then ministers are allowed to, obviously make up their own minds. That said, the scientists say, how can they reach a legitimate evidence-based decision if the scientists weren't even asked in the first place? Today, we're hearing from the chief scientific advisor, Angela McLean. She called Rishi Sunak Dr. Death. She said something which I can't repeat on TV about Carl Helligan, that lockdown sceptic scientist who Mark Dolan mentioned there. So all in all, it looks like it's set to be sort of more of the same from the COVID inquiry today, with the evidence from Angela McLean. Next week, we're expecting to hear from politicians. We're expecting to hear from Matt Hancock, Sajid Javid, Sadiq Khan. So we should be expecting something a little bit different next week, perhaps more about the economic considerations and less about the science. But this week is all about the science. We're hearing from all of the scientists, and they all have something pretty similar to say.
Funny that, a little bit like the last 2 years, 3 years, wasn't it? Thank you very much, Olivia. They all had similar things to say.
Well, indeed.
That's the issue, isn't it? We've got to trust the science. There's no such thing as the science.
And don't trust any policy that is not open to debate. If lockdowns are such a good idea, if vaccine mandates are such a good idea, then you would happily debate them. But of course, you couldn't debate them. You were chucked off Twitter, and often you'd lose your career for speaking out against them because you were a bad person. It is worth pointing out the government and the authorities are clear that lockdowns, vaccine mandates saved many, many lives. That is, a strong view.
I mean, that's the official line.
That's the majority view, wouldn't you say, in science? Are we in the minority? I think we probably are.
I think if you ask people who believe those issues to show you their figures, they can't. And that's how I think we have to have this conversation, because it is not settled.
You and I feel gaslit about this. I think it's complete madness. Yesterday's autumn statement demonstrates the impact of an attempt to stop a respiratory virus, which is a broken economy. If that's not going to cost more lives, then I can't help you with that. If a waiting list of 7.6 million people on the NHS caused by lockdowns is not going to cost lives, I can't help you.
And £500 billion that was spent on the pandemic, which we're now trying to claw back, which is why we now have the inflation and we now have the high interest rates. Don't think these issues are not
apparently
connected.
It's Brexit. Isn't it Brexit?
It's nothing to do with Brexit.
Quick one, though, before the news, because Tamsin's waiting. She's not a patient person by nature. Will the truth ever out?
I think we just have to keep banging this drum, Mark, whenever we can. Those of us who saw it differently from the start, we need the opportunity to say in public that there have always been two sides to this story.